Well, good afternoon. I'm Kevin Walker with the Overland Park Chamber of Commerce. Today I'm representing the Johnson County Public Policy Council, which is a collaborative effort of the 10 chambers of commerce representing more than 5,000 Johnson County businesses. We conduct voter education efforts such as this recording, and we publish a wealth of candidate information on the council's website, www.votejoco.com. With me today is Cindy Holscher, who's a candidate for the Kansas Senate District 8, and we're going to talk a little bit about some of the issues, but first I'm going to start with Cindy. If you want to give us a few opening comments, we'd welcome them.
Yeah, certainly. Thank you, Kevin. Thank you to the Chamber for hosting this. I'm Senator Cindy Holscher with Senate District 8. I have been serving the Overland Park area for the past 8 years. I first ran for the legislature in 2016, going into the House and serving 2 terms, and then crossed over to the Senate in 2020. My professional background is in marketing and operations, working for Sprint Publishing, and I worked with various teams, collaborating for different solutions, and I will say that gave me a great foundation for being in the legislature, collaborating with other individuals, and working as part of the super minority of Democrats. We have to push back against some bad policies at times. So like I said, a lot of those characteristics have helped me. I'm very proud of my record in the legislature. In my first term, I was a co-founder of the Women's Bipartisan Caucus. We helped in the Brownback experiment and returned the state to financial stability. I've also brought forward some groundbreaking legislation. A couple sessions ago, we passed statute of limitations reform for victims of sexual violence. So that was a very big move for the state. Additionally, this past session, I brought forward the Purple Alert bill, and that passed unanimously and has been signed by the governor. Additionally, as far as other big things that have happened, we have fully funded education the past 4 years, making much needed improvements to Highway 69, and we passed a great tax bill last session which exempts Social Security earnings and provides a child care tax credit. So we've accomplished some really good things, but there's more to be done, and I'm excited to take that next step and help bring Kansas forward.
Well, thank you for those thoughts, and why don't we dig right into our questions. The first one, as a candidate, what are your top 3 policy issues?
My top 3 priorities probably have been pretty consistent over the years. First, public schools. Secondly, access to health care. And third, taxes. Here in Johnson County, citizens realize that our quality of life, our outstanding amenities that we have available, it's all anchored to our public schools. That's what brings people here. Funding our schools is the most important job we have in the state legislature. And I'm passionate about ensuring that we provide a strong, solid education to every child in Kansas. In terms of health care, I will say voters, along with myself, are probably a bit frustrated at the fact that we haven't been able to get Medicaid expansion. We haven't been able to start a medicinal cannabis program in Kansas. And Kansans also expressed concern with the fact that they're wondering about what's going to happen to access to reproductive health care. While we had the vote on that issue back in August of 2022, extremists in the legislature continue to bring forward bills to chip away at access. So I know voters who have been seeing that happen have grown a little bit more frustrated with those types of things. I will say in terms of taxes, again, we made some steps in that area with the recent tax bill that we passed, but there's more we need to do. And we need to look at property taxes and some other areas. But in terms of other good news, taxes on groceries go away in January. So that has been a long-awaited change. And those are my main priorities. I will say what seems to be a priority of voters in Johnson County, as I'm going out to the doors and talking to people, they seem to be indicating that they're tired of the culture wars and the chaos that seems to bring to government. So I'm hearing voters, frustrated in that regard, hoping that things take a new course.
Well, you've mentioned several topics, some of which we're going to get into in a little more detail. Right now, let's start with state tax policy. Tell me what your thoughts are on state tax policy, and if you can, be as specific as you possibly can be.
Sure. Yes, I supported this recent tax plan. It's about $2.4 billion in relief. It contains a tax exemption on Social Security and the child care tax credit. Now, I want people to keep in mind that we fought all session to get those good things for Kansans. And I'm seeing some things out there right now. There are postcards circulating saying that certain Democrats voted against tax relief 4 times. But what those postcards don't say is the fact that those 4 plans were primarily a flat tax experiment. And flat taxes are very regressive in nature, benefiting the wealthy while hurting lower wages, people who make lower wages. There was a group of us, though, that held out throughout all of session, which runs from January to May, saying, no, we want a tax exemption on Social Security and the child care tax credit. We had to wait all session and then some. Because the extremists who control the legislature, the GOP leadership, kept bringing forward their flat tax bill. So we waited all session, then finally we were allowed to vote on a bill in June, and that's what allowed us to get those credits, or to get those provisions that we wanted. And you know, here's kind of the inside scoop. The people of Kansas don't want a flat tax. And all the credible institutions pushed back against that. Yet every Republican in Johnson County, except for Rob Olson, supported it. So it concerns me that while we had people saying they didn't support, while institutions, credible institutions who understand finances and taxes said don't support it, nearly everybody fell in line with extremist leadership. But where do we look next is probably, a very important question. I think in terms of seniors and families, potentially freezing property taxes or doing something in that regard. Additionally, there's a lot of support out there for bills that would exempt diapers and feminine hygiene products. And I think that the legislature really owes it to the people to take a harder look at those things.
You also mentioned education. So what are your views on K through 12 education funding and the accessibility of our schools?
Yeah, school funding is the whole reason I ran for office in the first place, to ensure that every child had access to a strong education. Probably as a result, I'm endorsed by every public school advocacy group out there. And like I said, that's just what I'm passionate about. And it's the most important job we do on the state level. What the public needs to know, though, is that every session in Topeka, we have to fight just to keep basic funding. There is a very real, sizable faction of legislators. They're backed by the Koch network, DeVos, and other organizations that want to privatize. That faction is working every session to defund our award-winning schools. And they do it through voucher plans. And let me be very, very clear with the voters. Voucher plans are a scam. It's just a well-marketed way of transferring your taxpayer funds from your schools to private institutions to the wealthy. And if you haven't seen it yet, I encourage you to watch Backpacks Full of Cash or read the book The Privateers. That gives you really, really good information about what this movement is really about. And the other thing to consider is that with this voucher movement, most of that taxpayer money is going to religious institutions, private religious schools. So if we think about that, taxpayers are being forced to give to the church. And it's interesting to me because we literally fought a war over this, to not have to tithe to a church or have a state religion. Yet here we are now at this point with taxpayer funds being diverted from public schools to religious institutions. What's very important, too, for people to keep in mind is that in this next term, the school funding formula will be renegotiated. That's critical because the Supreme Court is no longer overseeing the legislature's work to ensure that the legislature fulfills its obligations to educate children. Who we elect to the legislature is going to be very important because that faction that's been pushing vouchers, often many of them will tell you that they want to consider fully funding being at 50% of current levels. That's drastic. That will hurt our schools in an immense way. And if you think about it in those terms, that amount of underfunding would be disastrous for our schools, our county, and our state overall. So we have to elect candidates that support our public schools, and I encourage people to look to organizations like Game On, Stand Up Blue Valley, Education First, Shawnee Mission for endorsements. Those organizations have all endorsed me, and they are endorsing other candidates that are public school supporters.
I want to switch gears and talk a little bit about economic development. So what types of economic development policies do you support that would encourage job growth and business expansion in Kansas?
The devil's in the details. I mean, any plan that comes our way, I want to look at, I want to know what it does. And I will say I supported the Star Bonds issue this past session that was designed to try to bring the Chiefs and or possibly the Royals to Kansas. I supported that bill because it set up a framework that had to be worked on within a year. So there was a time frame. It couldn't just lag on for years and years. Additionally, in that case, we were looking at entities that are well-known commodities that produce revenue. You know, it's a bigger gamble if it's something that you're unsure of. So like I said, under those conditions and those specifics, I supported that STAR Bonds program. You know, economically, with the leadership of Governor Kelly the past few years, Kansas has really advanced in this area, winning several gold shovel awards, I think 4 in a row. We didn't have anything like that happening under the prior administration with Governor Brownback. And honestly, in my role as a legislator, I think it's important to partner with our local communities and listen to them and their priorities for growth. They're closer to the situation and have a closer ear to it.
You can't talk about economic development with also talking about workforce. So what would you do to grow and develop the state's workforce?
Yeah, you know, once again, our economy is anchored in excellent public schools, so we must continue to invest in that area. We must continue to pay teachers, probably need to pay them a little bit more from where their wages are currently so we can attract and retain. Secondly, though, expanding Medicaid could make a big difference in bringing jobs to the area. We would better be able to attract and retain healthcare professionals. And you know, the other thing that is mentioned to me a lot is that we need to do a better job as a state in attracting young people. You know, and the foundation again for that is strong schools, improving access to childcare, affordable housing. But additionally, young people often indicate they don't feel welcome here due to some of the legislative attacks on minorities, continued assaults on reproductive health care. So we've got to do a better job as far as looking towards the future and thinking about our population and what it looks like and what they want.
I want to go back to education, this time talking about higher ed. What are your views on the state's role with respect to ensuring access and affordability of post-secondary education?
You know, we passed the Kansas Promise Scholarship a couple years ago to better attract high-demand fields. But honestly, so much of our time in Topeka the past few years has been spent on just holding on to our schools and securing funding for our public schools that we haven't been able to dedicate as much time to the higher funding. We've made some advancements, but we need to put more focus to ensuring that college is affordable and accessible to all of our students. And honestly, we're losing some of our best and brightest to other states. I mean, I want to do what we can to ensure that we're retaining those top quality graduates here in Kansas.
You had mentioned Medicaid expansion, another topic we had that I want to ask you about. So what are your views on healthcare policy and specifically Medicaid expansion in Kansas?
Yeah, I have voted in favor of Medicaid expansion every single time it has been brought forward. Approximately 150,000 Kansans are in that don't hold the coverage gap. Medicaid expansion is supported by a majority of Kansans, supported by chambers across the state, hospitals, medical professionals, and sadly, we have foregone over $8 billion in funding. That's our tax money going to other states when we should be using it here to help our people and our economy. And essentially, we end up paying double because people end up using the ER, and that has to get covered somehow. You know, over the past couple of sessions, there have been efforts to try to bring Medicaid expansion, but people need to realize that GOP leadership has done everything they can to block it. We made a couple of different motions to bring the bill forward, but sadly, every Republican in Johnson County blocked those efforts except for Rob Olson. So while leadership is blocking the efforts to bring forward Medicaid expansion, sadly, we've had legislators here in Johnson County do the same. And it's very sad in respect to the fact that 40 other states have implemented it. None of them have walked away from Medicaid expansion saying it didn't work. And there are so many things that are tied to it. Improvements in mental health care, ability to attract and retain health care professionals, our ability to keep rural hospitals open. Those are all incredible important things. And frankly, it's just shameful we haven't implemented here in Kansas, and I hope we can get it done soon.
You know, there's been a lot of discussion in Topeka about foreign land ownership, leasing, and purchasing equipment containing foreign manufactured parts. So what factors do you consider when attempting to balance national security concerns against free enterprise and private property rights?
Yeah, you're right. There's a lot of chatter about this. this past session. I serve on Fed and State, and a lot of that talk was due primarily to the fact that Attorney General Chris Kobach brought forward a bill kind of under the guise of that topic. In essence, though, that bill would have allowed him to build up his office with more full-time positions. And I will say that bill was overwhelmingly opposed by the agricultural and business communities. That particular bill forced divestiture without rights to seek and appeal or redress, which is concerning, which would then likely force small businesses into litigation and lengthy proceedings. Additionally, there were a number of people who said that that bill was just unconstitutional on several fronts. And what that would have meant to us is, again, as a state, more litigation, more lengthy court time. And while national security is very, very important, there are resources on the federal level to address this, and I've got to think that they're in a much better position to address national security than the Attorney General's office in Kansas. The reality is this was another Chris Kobach plan that would likely have cost the state millions in litigation while growing government.
Well, and my last question for you deals with local control, and how control over decision-making is divided among the state legislature and local governments, including our school boards, on issues such as taxation, economic development, and education have been a matter of debate. So what are your views on this issue?
You know what? The Kansas legislature has very much shown they have a habit of inserting themselves into local issues, and the legislature needs to do a better job of respecting local control. Because again, there are local officials in place who are closer to the situations. They're the experts. Frankly, the state legislature doesn't need to micromanage the local levels, and again, needs to respect local control.
Well, Cindy, I want to thank you for sharing your thoughts on some of these important issues that we've covered. I want to give you just a little bit of time to offer any final thoughts on anything we may not have covered.
Yeah, thank you for that, Kevin. I shared a lot of information this afternoon about voting records, state legislators, especially here in Johnson County, because I want people to be aware. It's very easy for a candidate to show up at your door and say, I support schools, but then vote totally different in Topeka. So like I said, that's very important. And I'm going to post some information later on my social media that shows some of those voting records so people can see for themselves. And the fact of the matter is voters have a very clear choice this election cycle relative to Senate District 8. I have the endorsements of every education advocacy group, as well as Moms Demand Action, Farm Bureau, the Kansas City Regional Association of Realtors, BizPAC, and tons of other organizations that are all about growth and moving forward in our communities. And I also have the endorsement of Governor Laura Kelly. My opponent, on the other hand, is backed by Moms for Liberty, and that is an extremist group connected to Proud Boys and QAnon. I will just say their vision and their goals for our state are much different and not at all mainstream. This will likely be the most consequential election in our lifetimes, both on the federal and state levels. With the current extremist supermajority in the legislature, there's so much in peril. Our funding for our schools, access to reproductive health care, voting rights, and just the fact that we continuously have a looming threat of returning to Brownback-style tax policies, which could ruin our state. So again, so much at stake. So to those people who live in my district, I ask for your vote. If you're not in my district, please talk to your friends and your neighbors about what's at stake and make sure that they understand, because we need voters across Johnson County and the state to help bring balance back to Topeka by electing leaders who will join me in serving the people and not special interest groups.
Well, again, I want to thank you for being here today, and also want to thank you for your willingness to serve the people of Johnson County.
Certainly.
I want to remind people watching this video that voter registration ends on Tuesday, October 15th. Advance voting begins on Saturday, October 19th. And of course, Election Day is Tuesday, November 5th.